The Großdeutschland division was an elite combat unit of the German army. Staffed exclusively by volunteers and attracting the cream of Germany's young officers, it quickly established a reputation for excellence on the battlefield. The very name Großdeutschland, or Greater Germany, summoned up the ethos of the unit. It was no ordinary line unit, but the German army's premier fighting force, containing its most experienced and professional officers and soldiers. It became fashionable among aristocratic middle-ranking officers to join the Großdeutschland as a way to gain battle experience, medals and promotion. From a political point of view, it was also seen as important to ensure that the German army was not totally eclipsed by the Waffen-SS. The rank and file soldiers were some of the most battle-hardened on the Eastern Front. To highlight its elite status, the soldiers were allowed to wear special insignia. Probably the most well-known was the cuff title, which was worn 12 centimeters above the sleeve. Since the association belonged to the army and not to the Waffen-SS, the soldiers wore the cuff title on the right sleeve. The second one was the GD monogram, which was authorized for wear on the shoulder boards of all ranks of this unit. In addition, all vehicles of the division had the same tactical symbol, a white steel helmet with the direction of view from right to left. But such an elite status also meant that the division was thrown into desperate battles against the Red Army on the Eastern Front. Fortunately for the unit, in late 1942 it was diverted north to help Army Group Center around the Rzeszów salient rather than joining the 6th Army for its doomed advance to Stalingrad. Nevertheless, it was not destined to have an easy time. The Großdeutschland troops were formed into a hard-hitting reserve that rushed from one crisis point to another, but the salient held through the miserable winter. In January of 1943, Großdeutschland was ordered to be pulled out of the line and move south to rest and refit. By the time the division made it to its assembly area, it was joined by the newly formed Panzer-Regiment Großdeutschland. In early 1943, a typical German panzer division had one panzer regiment with 2 battalions. Each tank battalion had 3 companies, 2 light companies with Panzer III tanks, and 1 medium company with Panzer IV tanks. But the Panzer-Regiment Großdeutschland was different. It had 2 full battalions of 45 Panzer IV G tanks with a more powerful long barrel gun, and the division also received 9 early model Tiger heavy tanks. They were grey in color with rubber-lined road wheels. The division was still officially called Infantry Division Großdeutschland MOT, so Mechanized Infantry Division Großdeutschland, but it had more, better and newer tanks than any other panzer division in the entire German army. It is important to note that the Tiger heavy tanks were usually organized into independent, battalion-sized formations, and only the Waffen-SS panzer divisions had organic heavy tank companies. According to a report, 2 Großdeutschland Tigers encountered 20 Russian T-34 tanks in March of 1943. Both Tigers were hit at least 10 times at ranges from 500 to 1000 meters with no penetrations. These two Tigers managed to knock out 10 Russian tanks in 15 minutes. This is only one from the many reports before the Battle of Kursk where the new Tigers proved their value. This can be one of the reasons why the German military leadership felt that they could defeat the Russians' superior numbers in the upcoming offensive. During March, the Tigers knocked out over 40 Russian military vehicles without a single combat loss. By the end of March, the company was pulled back to regroup and repair their Tigers. The last upgrade which arrived to the Panzer-Regiment Großdeutschland was not a new tank, but a new commander, Colonel Hyacinth von Strachwitz. He was already a hero from World War I when he had led a German raiding party into Paris. The division had only just escaped from the encirclement in Kharkov when the newly reinforced Panzer Regiment was ordered to lead a German counterattack to turn back the Soviet winter offensive. Von Strachwitz led his panzers forward with considerable dash during March of 1943, pushing forward at a great pace until it was engaged by the Soviet 2nd Tank Corps. In the first clash of a bloody week, 46 T-34 tanks were knocked out by the Großdeutschland Panzer Regiment. The German offensive now started to gain momentum, with village after village falling to von Strachwitz's panzers. The following day, they ran into a network of Soviet anti-tank guns called Pack Front by the Germans, in prepared positions and backed by a large number of infantry bunkers. The Tigers came into their own, standing off and systematically blasting the anti-tank guns out of their bunkers. As the attack rolled forward, on 16th of March 1943, another 30 T-34 tanks were destroyed by the Panzers when they surprised a Soviet tank brigade in its assembly area. More Soviet tanks were thrown into battle 2 days later, but von Strachwitz quickly deployed his panzers to surprise the advancing Soviets. The panzers were driven into peasant huts to hide them, and von Strachwitz ordered his gunners to hold their fire. The Soviet tanks cautiously edged forward until they were actually inside the village. With nerves of steel, the panzer crews held fire for several hours. When the Soviet tanks exposed their side armor to the Germans, von Strachwitz fired his 88mm cannon, which took the turret of a T-34 with ease. This was a signal for the rest of the regiment to open up. In a few seconds, 18 T-34 tanks were in flames. It was then that the Germans moved forward to attack. By the end of the day, 90 Soviet tanks had been destroyed. Soviet attacks continued for more than a week as several infantry divisions and tank brigades were thrown at the Großdeutschland lines. All these efforts were rebuffed with heavy losses among the attackers. At the end of March, General Heinz Guderian, the inspector of the panzer troops, came to view the Großdeutschland's handiwork. With pride, von Strachwitz was able to show the father of the German panzers a tank graveyard north of Kharkov containing hundreds of smashed Soviet T-34 tanks.